There are few decisions more quietly profound than the moment you choose to let someone go. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in clarity. When you no longer cling, when you release not just the person, but the attachment, the need, the illusion. You do not merely lose someone, you meet yourself again. Letting go is not passive, it is not retreat, it is not failure. It is an inner act of courage, a spiritual initiation. It marks a turning point in the life of the soul, and if you observe it closely, you will see that something begins to shift the moment that decision is made. The spiritual architecture of the psyche rearranges itself. What was once scattered becomes still. What was once fragmented begins to unify. When you finally reach the point where you decide to let someone go, not out of anger, not in dramatic rebellion, but from a deep, silent knowing, something profound begins to move within the depths of your psyche. This movement is not loud. It is not immediately visible. It begins in the dark, where real transformation always starts. You may feel it first as a weariness, as if your soul can no longer carry the burden of trying to be seen, understood, or loved in a place that continuously denies your essence. And so, in that quiet space, you say, enough, not in bitterness, but in truth. And that is when the soul shifts. This moment of surrender marks the beginning of something far more spiritual than it appears. On the surface, it may seem like the end of a relationship, but beneath it, in the unseen chambers of the inner world, a deeper current stirs, the beginning of liberation, because the very act of letting go reveals the truth you may have been resisting. You never had control. You never could force understanding or closeness or love. What you could do was mold yourself, shape yourself, contort and diminish and overextend. And you did. For love, for hope, for the illusion that if you gave enough, you would be enough. This illusion, though well-intentioned, is costly to the soul. It keeps you in a state of subtle exile from your true nature. You wear the mask, not because you are deceitful, but because it was the only way to stay near what you wanted. You quiet your voice, soften your truth, manage your depth, but beneath the compromise, your spirit waits. It waits for the moment when you no longer mistake attachment for love. Evolved. It waits for you to come home. Letting go breaks the illusion of control that the ego holds so tightly. We like to believe we can shape another's capacity to love us. We think if we are more patient, more kind, more forgiving, we can coax tenderness from indifference. But love is not created through self-sacrifice. It is revealed through presence. And presence cannot be forced. Letting go, then, is the moment you stop performing. It is the moment the mask drops. And what follows is a strange stillness, like the quiet after a storm. A clarity that says, I was never meant to beg for what should be freely given. In spiritual terms, this is a death, not of the self, but of the false self. The one who tried so hard to be chosen, the one who equated value with being needed, the one who kept waiting for reciprocity that never came. This death is painful, yes, but it is necessary. Without it, the deeper self cannot emerge. Without it, your soul remains locked in a cycle of reaching, performing, and wondering why love always feels just out of reach. When the illusion falls away, it can feel as if the world has gone quiet. You may look around and wonder who you are now, that the role you played is no longer required. This is not emptiness. This is sacred ground. It is the fertile space where your authentic nature begins to root itself. You are no longer trying to manage someone else's perception. You are no longer making yourself smaller to avoid abandonment. You are no longer clinging to a version of love that asks you to disappear. And in this letting go, what you gain is not just freedom. It is the first glimpse of who you truly are. To the outside world, it may appear as loss, but inside, Your soul recognizes the truth. Something false has ended, and something real is beginning. You stop seeking yourself in someone else's eyes, and instead begin to turn inward, where your reflection is whole, not conditional, where your worth is not up for debate. And from that place, everything changes. You may still feel grief. You may still feel longing. But these feelings are no longer chains. They are just passing weather. What remains, beneath the rise and fall of emotion, is a new center. A deeper trust. A quiet knowing that you are no longer at the mercy of someone else's ability or inability to love you. And that, truly, is the beginning of spiritual sovereignty. This is where freedom begins. Once the illusion of control has fallen away, and you have surrendered to the truth that holding on is no longer serving your soul, something else begins to emerge. Often uncomfortable, often intense, and rarely understood. It does not come with relief, not immediately. It comes with weight. You start to feel things you thought you had already overcome. Old wounds reopen. Buried memories rise like smoke from beneath the floorboards. There is anger, confusion, sorrow. You may even question yourself, wondering why, after finally letting go, the pain seems to grow rather than dissolve. Speaks to people who are in a limbic pond of unresolved trauma. This is because letting go is not only about moving on from someone else. It is about facing what you once used them to avoid. When we are attached to another person, especially one who does not or cannot meet us fully, we often stay entangled not simply out of love, but because the attachment provides a distraction from deeper, older pain. The relationship becomes a container where our wounds can quietly hide under the surface, and when it breaks, the container shatters too. Everything that was hidden inside it comes flooding into consciousness. This flood is not your enemy. It is your inheritance. It is the shadow. The part of you that was never allowed to speak while you were focused on being lovable, pleasing, or chosen. It is every moment of abandonment you didn't have time to feel. Every time you were not enough for someone you loved. Every part of yourself you tucked away so you wouldn't be too much. And now, with no one left to appease, the soul brings it all to the surface. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel like regression, but it is neither. It is not a step backward. It is a step inward. You are not falling apart. You are coming into contact with the parts of yourself that have lived in silence. You are meeting your pain, not to indulge in it, but to understand it. And understanding is the beginning of liberation. These old wounds do not resurface to torment you. They come for integration. You cannot heal what you do not face. You cannot reclaim the fullness of your being while rejecting the pieces that were broken. When you let go of someone who did not see your worth, what rises is your own question. Why didn't they? But underneath that question is a deeper one. Why do This is the purpose of the shadow's return, to help you see what parts of yourself you have not yet fully welcomed. You may encounter shame, you may feel resentment, you may feel rage, especially if you spent years minimizing your truth for the sake of peace. But this is not the time to run. It is the time to sit, to listen, to allow your soul to say what it could never say in the relationship. You might hear it say, "I am tired of pretending," or "I deserve to be held without earning it," or "I am worthy even when I am angry or sad or afraid." This is sacred work. It is not glamorous. It does not look like enlightenment, but it is the foundation for it. Every part of you that rises in the silence left behind by that person is a part of you longing to return home. This is not about blaming the other. It is about finally turning toward yourself with the kind of presence you once demanded from them. And as you begin to tend to these exiled parts, Slowly, gently, consistently, a shift begins. The pain, while still present, becomes clearer. It becomes meaningful. You start to see that the grief was never only about them, it was about your own disconnection, your own silence, your own forgetting. And now, because you let go, because you stopped chasing what would not nourish you, you have created the space to remember. You remember your voice. You remember your boundaries. You remember that your emotions are not too much, they are messengers. You remember that you are not made to shrink. What rises after letting go is not just sadness. It is your power, raw and unpolished, demanding to be lived. The shadow is not darkness. It is just the truth that lived without light. And now it is returning, not to destroy you, but to complete you. This is how your soul begins to come home. As the shadow rises, as the wounds begin to surface and ask for attention, there is another profound shift that takes place in the soul's journey, the dissolution of the projections. These projections are not just simple misunderstandings or fleeting judgments. They are deeper, far more subtle. They are the unconscious ways in which we assign qualities, strengths, and even deficiencies to another person, based on our own unprocessed needs, desires, and fears. In relationships, we often place the other on a pedestal, ascribing to them the qualities we feel we lack or long to possess. Or we cast them into roles of savior or villain, attaching them to our internal dramas. When you let go of someone, the first thing that happens is the slow fading of these projections. The person who once seemed to hold the keys to your happiness, your validation, your sense of worth, begins to shrink, to take their rightful place, not as a mirror reflecting your unhealed self, but as a person in their own right. They are no longer the source of your feelings, your self-esteem, your needs. And this is the beginning of a deep spiritual awakening, the recognition that the world does not revolve around you, nor does it revolve around them. The truth is more expansive. At first, this can be disorienting. For so long, your identity was partially constructed through the lens of the other person's view of you. When that mirror shatters, it can feel as though you are lost, untethered. Who are you without their gaze? Who are you without their approval or disapproval, without their validation or critique? And yet, in this space of vulnerability, something else is quietly unfolding. The space that was once filled with projections is now empty, available for something truer, more authentic to rise in its place. You begin to see yourself as you are, not as the person you believed you should be to earn their love, but as the person who exists regardless of whether or not they ever saw you for who you truly are. As these projections dissolve, the ego's role as the guardian of these illusions begins to weaken. The need to be loved in a particular way starts to fall away, and you realize that love is not about being seen by someone else as you would like to be seen. It is about being able to see yourself, to recognize your own worth without relying on external validation. The more you move through the process of letting go, the more you begin to understand that the love you seek was never meant to come from someone else. It was meant to come from you. The dissolution of projections is also the unveiling of what was hidden behind them, the true self. For when we place someone else at the center of our emotional universe, we are simultaneously hiding parts of ourselves from view, particularly the parts that have been rejected or neglected. We hope, in some way, that the other person will fulfill what we feel is missing in us. But this is an illusion. We wait for someone else to complete us, to make us whole. And when they cannot, we either sink further into despair or begin the painful work of reclaiming our own fragmented parts. The most profound healing comes when you realize that no one can complete you. No one can fill the emptiness you once projected onto them. In this process, you begin to reclaim that missing piece, that sense of wholeness, not by looking outward, but by turning inward. The journey of letting go becomes a journey of self-discovery, where you no longer need to lean on someone else to define who you are. The projections fall away, and you can begin to stand in your own truth, unencumbered by what you thought you needed from someone else. Or the other person begins to appear in their truest form as well, no longer the savior or the villain, no longer the one who holds the power to determine your worth. They are simply another human being, living their own life, struggling with their own fears, joys, and complexities. This shift allows you to release the fantasy of who they were in your life and accept them as they truly are, flawed, complex, and not responsible for your emotional well-being. And with this acceptance, there comes peace, not just with them but with yourself. You realize that your value was never tied to their actions, and in seeing them for who they are, you finally see yourself clearly. What follows is a deepening of self-compassion. When you stop projecting your unhealed needs onto another person, you create space for self-love to emerge in its purest form. Self-love does not come from feeding the ego or indulging in narcissistic desires. It comes from recognizing your own humanity, your own vulnerability, and your own strength. It comes from understanding that you are worthy of love simply because you exist, not because you are perfect, not because you are always giving, but because you are enough, as you are. And as you begin to dissolve these projections, you also begin to see the other person in their humanity, which may bring about a sense of forgiveness, if not for their actions, then for your own. You forgive yourself for believing that someone else could fulfill what only you could give yourself. You forgive yourself for hoping that someone could be something they never were capable of being. You forgive yourself for needing them to be different in order to feel complete. And in this forgiveness, there is a kind of release, a lightness. You no longer hold them in a role they never agreed to, and you no longer hold yourself to an image you never needed to uphold. When the projections dissolve, so too does the emotional weight you carried for so long. What you are left with is freedom. The freedom to exist as you truly are, unencumbered by the need for external validation. This is the spiritual freedom that comes when you let go, the freedom to be whole, to be enough, to love yourself without needing someone else to mirror that love back to you. And in this freedom, you find peace. When you let go of someone, there is a profound moment of inner silence that follows. It may be subtle at first, perhaps an unsettling stillness, a pause in the noise of your everyday life. But if you sit with it long enough, you begin to notice something stirring beneath the surface, something you hadn't anticipated. It's a quiet, unspoken presence, the awakening of your deeper self. This is a pivotal moment. It is the beginning of the soul's realignment, the time when you can start to reconnect with the essence of who you truly are. Letting go is not simply an act of releasing the other person, but it is also an act of returning to yourself. So often, in the midst of a relationship, we lose touch with the core of our being. We become so wrapped up in the dance of connection, in the constant striving to be understood and loved, that we forget the stillness that resides at the center of our being. We forget that before anyone else's voice, before their needs and expectations, there was the silent, constant hum of our own soul. When you let go, that hum becomes audible again. It is the voice of your true self, untainted by the need to perform or appease. It is the voice that whispers softly, guiding you back to a place of balance, peace, and clarity. You no longer have to shape yourself to fit someone else's world. You no longer need to pretend or suppress your truth for the sake of being accepted. The relief that comes with this is profound, as if you have been holding your breath for years and finally, at last, you exhale. In this space of newfound silence, there is no longer the constant ache of hoping, of waiting for something from the other person, no longer the strain of trying to please, to earn affection, or to validate your worth. For the first time, you can breathe freely in your own skin. You begin to realize that your worth was never dependent on another's recognition. It was always within you, quietly waiting to be acknowledged. This is the awakening of the inner self. This is the part of you that doesn't require validation from others. It doesn't need to be seen or acknowledged in the way you once thought you did. It is whole and complete, always was, always will be. This self does not shrink, it expands. And it expands when you create the space for it to do so. When you stop looking outside of yourself for your sense of wholeness and begin to look within. It is as if a veil lifts and you are able to see yourself clearly for the first time. You see yourself not as an extension of someone else's expectations, but as a unique being with your own desires, your own purpose, your own worth. The self that awakens is not perfect, nor is it free of flaws, but it is authentic. It is the part of you that embraces both the light and the shadow. It is the part of you that knows you are worthy not because of your actions or how well you meet others' needs, but simply because you are. It is a deep recognition that you have always been enough, and that no one else has the power to define your value. This awakening often brings with it a sense of calm. It is as though the turbulence of the past has cleared, and there is a stillness now, a quiet certainty that comes from within. No longer does your sense of peace depend on the approval or affection of another person. The world may continue to swirl around you, relationships may come and go, but you remain grounded in the truth of who you are. This is the spiritual alignment that comes with letting go. You no longer look outside yourself for the answers. You find them within. You stop relying on someone else's love to validate your existence, and instead, you realize that the love you sought was always meant to be your own. What follows is a deep, gentle sense of inner peace. There is no longer a need to fix, to heal, or to prove. You are allowed to simply be. And in this being, something deeper emerges, a connection to the flow of life itself. You start to feel the pulse of the universe, the interconnectedness of all things. You begin to understand that you are not separate, but a part of a greater whole. And from this understanding arises a profound trust in the unfolding of your life. You no longer need to force or control. You simply trust the flow. You trust that what is meant for you will find its way to you, in its own time, in its own form. The awakening of the deeper self is not just a spiritual experience, it is a return to your true nature. It is a coming home to the place where you are most aligned with who you are meant to be. You begin to see that the struggles, the pain, the relationships that have shaped you were all necessary steps in this unfolding process. You see them not as obstacles or failures, but as catalysts for growth. When you let go, you create the conditions for this deeper self to emerge. It is not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle, ongoing process of coming into alignment with your true essence. You may not feel it in every moment, but the more you trust yourself and the more you allow yourself to be, the more this deeper self will reveal itself. And when it does, you will find that there is a sense of ease, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose that was always there, just waiting for you to listen. In the quiet that follows the decision to let go, you may discover something unexpected. It is not the emptiness you feared. It is not the absence of love. It is the presence of your own soul, full and undivided, ready to guide you toward the life that is truly yours. And in this awakening, you come home to yourself. When you let go of someone, something remarkably powerful happens. You begin to reconnect with your inherent sense of strength. For too long, in the midst of the relationship, you might have diminished yourself, adjusting your boundaries, softening your voice, and contorting your needs in ways that allowed you to fit into a space that never truly honored you. It may have been a quiet erosion, one that took place over time until you found yourself feeling smaller, unseen, or even lost. In the attempt to be loved and understood, you gave up part of yourself, knowingly or unknowingly. But once you let go, a shift occurs. You reclaim your power, not in a forceful, dramatic way, but in a quiet, undeniable recognition of your own worth. This is a profound moment of spiritual renewal, one that transcends the dynamics of the past and centers you in the fullness of who you are. As you move through the process of releasing someone who doesn't value you, a deep and often subtle sense of inner strength begins to rise. It is not a strength that comes from external validation or external forces, but from the understanding that you are enough, simply as you are. There is no need to prove yourself anymore. There is no need to twist yourself into shapes that are not yours in order to fit someone else's idea of what you should be. You begin to trust your instincts, your intuition, and your inherent worth. The moment you let go, you stop seeking permission from the world to occupy your space. Instead, you simply exist. And in that existence, there is power. You begin to stand in the truth of your own being without needing anyone else to affirm it. This newfound strength comes from something deeper than willpower. It comes from the recognition that your true self cannot be diminished. No matter how much someone else may have ignored or invalidated you, your essence remains intact. You cannot lose who you are, no matter how much you give or how much you try to appease. And this is the great revelation. You were never dependent on anyone else to be whole. This realization is a quiet but profound moment of liberation. In the silence left by that person, you start to hear your own voice again, your own inner truth that had been drowned out by the noise of trying to fit into someone else's world. And with this recognition comes the return of your dignity. Dignity is not arrogance. It is not about claiming superiority over others. It is about standing firmly in the truth of your own worth, knowing that you have always been valuable, regardless of someone else's inability or unwillingness to see it. You no longer beg for recognition or approval. You no longer shrink to validation. You no longer shrink to make room for someone else. You begin to honor yourself, to respect your needs and desires, and to create the space for them to be expressed. This dignity does not come from what you can achieve or what you can give. It comes from simply being unapologetically who you are, being unapologetically present in your own life. In letting go, you give yourself the permission to stop denying your own existence. You give yourself permission to take up space, and this is when your personal power begins to unfold. The beauty of this process is that it is not something you need to force or rush. The strength you begin to tap into is not external or externalized. It is something that emerges from within, in the quiet of your heart, in the stillness of your mind, and in the clarity of your soul. It is the realization that you are complete on your own, and this realization is so much more empowering than any outside source of validation. When you no longer rely on someone else to provide you with the strength you seek, you discover an endless well of resilience within yourself. You realize that no matter the obstacles, no matter the difficulties, you will always have the power to move forward. The strength you gain in letting go is not the kind that requires constant struggle. It is a quiet, steady resilience that allows you to meet life on your terms. It is the strength that comes with setting boundaries, the strength that comes with saying no when necessary, and the strength that comes from saying yes to yourself, even when it means stepping away from someone who doesn't respect you. This strength is not an act of defiance. It is an act of self-respect, and that self-respect builds your spiritual foundation, one that is rooted in authenticity and self-love.